The late afternoon sun burned like fire above the Texas plains, its light spilling gold across the wide horizon. Heat shimmered off the dry earth, the air so still it seemed to press against the lungs. Out there, among the dust and sweat, Clara Monroe bent her tired body to the work of the ranch. Her small frame was sturdy, but worn down, her fingers rough with calluses, her arms trembling with the weight of tools too heavy for one woman alone. She had been at it since dawn, mending fences, hauling water, checking cattle. And though her muscles begged her to stop, she pressed on. Because stopping meant losing everything, Clara's life had been carved from hardship. Her mother had died young, leaving her with faint memories of laughter that smelled of lavender soap and warm bread. Her father had worked the land with every ounce of his soul, his back bent but unbroken, until illness stole him too. On his deathbed, Clara had held his roughened hand and promised him she would not let the land he cherished fall into ruin. That vow had become her armor, her purpose, her burden. She woke with it each morning and fell asleep with it each night, though lately her rest came in snatches, haunted by fears she could not quiet. This land was all she had left of him, but the bank was circling closer. Debts piled higher each month, and storms had destroyed the fences that once held the cattle steady. Half the herd was lost, and with them, half her income. Each nail she drove into wood, each blister on her hands, was another desperate attempt to keep her promise alive. Pride kept her going as much as duty. Pride told her she didn't need help, didn't need pity, didn't need a man to save her. But pride was also a heavy weight, and though her spirit was strong, her body faltered more with each passing week. That evening, as the sun stretched low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and crimson, Clara found herself fighting a losing battle against a fence post that refused to sink into the hardened ground. She pressed her weight against it, sweat dripping down her temples, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The soil was packed tight from months of drought, the post barely budging, no matter how fiercely she drove it. Her shoulders screamed in pain, but she gritted her teeth and pushed harder. She could not fail, not now, not ever, need a hand. The voice startled her, low and steady, carried on the dry wind. Clara spun around, her heart leaping, and found a cowboy sitting astride a chestnut horse at the edge of the field. His hat was pulled low, shadowing sharp blue eyes, his frame tall and solid in the saddle. He looked like he belonged to the land itself, weathered, quiet, strong. She recognized him faintly, James Callahan, a drifting ranch hand, known to pick up work wherever he could find it. People said little about him except that he kept to himself, and some whispered he had left behind sorrow back in Missouri. Clara straightened, swiping the dirt from her brow, masking her exhaustion behind a defiant glare. "I can manage." Her words snapped sharp, meant to cut off pity before it could form. Pride braced her spine, even though her hands shook from fatigue. James tilted his hat back slightly, studying her with calm patience. "Doesn't look like it." The post loomed stubborn and mocking behind her. Clara grabbed her mallet and swung again, the blow clanging off wood with little effect. Her throat tightened. Every failure felt like her father's memory slipping farther away, like her vow cracking under the weight she had carried alone too long. "Fine," she muttered at last, tossing the mallet down with a thud. But only this once. James dismounted with slow ease, leading his horse to the side. He stepped up to the post, his movements unhurried, his strength quiet but undeniable. With steady force, he drove the post into the soil, his boots firm, his arms sure. The ground yielded under his determination in a way it never had under hers. Clara watched, torn between resentment and reluctant relief, her jaw tight. She had fought for so long to prove she could stand alone. Yet here was a stranger making the impassable seem effortless. When the job was done, James dusted off his gloves and gave her a nod, as though he had done nothing of consequence. Clara bent quickly to gather her tools, hiding the storm of emotions in her chest. "Thank you," she said stiffly, her voice clipped. "But I don't need charity." James's gaze lingered on her, steady and kind but unyielding. "It's not charity," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's company. There's a difference." The words caught her off guard, settling somewhere deep inside her heart. company. She had been alone so long she had forgotten what the word even felt like. Before she could reply, he mounted his horse again, tipped his hat and rode away, leaving her staring after him as the sun dipped behind the horizon. That night, as Clara lay on her narrow bed, the room lit only by a flickering lantern, his words echoed in her mind. She had fought so hard to carry her burdens alone that she had forgotten what it meant to share the weight, even for a moment. The memory of his calm presence unsettled her, tugging at the walls she had built high around herself. The next day he returned, and the day after that. Sometimes he came with supplies, sometimes with tools, sometimes only his quiet company. He never asked for payment, never demanded gratitude. He simply worked beside her, fixing fences, checking cattle, repairing broken things with patient hands. Clara tried to push him away with curt replies and sharp looks, but James never flinched. He met her stubbornness with silence, her pride with patience, her loneliness with steady companionship. Slowly, unwillingly, she found herself softening. One evening, after hours of toil under a relentless sun, Clara stood gazing at the horizon. Her body ached, her spirit frayed, and her hands trembled around the handle of her tool. James approached quietly, his boots crunching in the dust, his horse trailing behind. "You don't have to do it all alone," he said, his tone steady but gentle. Clara's throat tightened. "I promised my father," James cut in softly, his voice carrying no judgment. "You promised to keep the land, Clara, not to break yourself doing it." Her breath caught, the words slicing through her armor. Her eyes burned, and she turned her face away quickly, ashamed of the tears that threatened to fall. For years, she had equated strength with silence, with carrying burdens until her back bent under the weight. But his words made her question everything. James stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers. The touch was warm, grounding, real. "Clara," he whispered, his voice low and certain, "you've worked enough. You've proven enough. You are enough. You can rest now, beside me." The world seemed to still around them, the prairie wind quiet, the horizon painted with fading light. For the first time in years, Clara felt something she had forgotten, the freedom of letting go, of not fighting alone, of believing that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry it all by herself anymore. The days that followed were different. The land seemed to breathe easier, and so did Clara. There was a new rhythm to her mornings now, one that included the steady, reliable presence of James. He was there before the sun rose, guiding the cattle out of the pens, mending fences and hauling supplies. His movements confident and effortless. Clara had expected his help to feel like a burden, or perhaps a reminder of her own weakness, but instead it brought a quiet relief she had never known. The work didn't feel heavier with him beside her. Somehow it felt lighter, manageable, even hopeful. She began to notice small things she hadn't in years, the way the wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the field, how the soft lowing of the cattle sounded almost like laughter, the way the horizon held the colors of a fire that never burned out. Despite the reprieve James offered, the ranch was still on the brink of collapse. The bank's shadow loomed over every plan, every fence mended, every cow counted. One grey afternoon, heavy clouds blotting the sun from the sky, a carriage rattled down the dusty trail toward the farmhouse. The banker himself emerged, tall and imposing, his boots caked in mud, his eyes sharp as blades. Clara straightened instinctively, gripping the railing of the porch as he approached. Every promise she had made to her father felt like a fragile thread stretched tight, threatening to snap. "I've come about the overdue payments," the banker said, his voice smooth but cruel. "You're behind on 2 months, Miss Monroe, and the last storm. That destroyed fence? That's on your head." Clara's heart sank, but she refused to show fear. "I will have it sorted," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "We'll manage. I always manage." The banker's lips twisted in a slight, condescending smile. "Manage? We'll see about that. If the debts aren't covered soon, the bank will have to claim what remains of your ranch. And believe me, Miss Monroe, it won't be pretty." Clara's hands tightened around the railing. Her chest heaved. Not from exertion this time, but from a sudden surge of panic and helplessness. All the effort, the endless days, the aching limbs, was it enough? Would it ever be enough to save the land she loved so fiercely? She felt herself faltering under the weight of the world she had carried alone for so long. Before she could respond, James stepped forward. The sunlight broke through the clouds just enough to catch the glint in his eyes, and Clara noticed something she hadn't before, the unshakable certainty that radiated from him. He planted his boots firmly in the dirt, meeting the banker's gaze without fear. "She's not losing this land," he said quietly. But there was a firmness in his tone that made the banker flinch. "Not while I'm here."